G'day and welcome back for another Space Engineers tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at tracking the sun. And that's because there are a few blocks in Space Engineers that can gain an advantage from doing so, such as these algae farms, solar panels, and oxygen farms. If you look at these algae farms that I built a long time ago, these were built to face the morning sun, and they get a pretty good output from the morning sun. They also get a decent output from the evening sun, or the afternoon sun. But if you look at them from the top, you can see that you can't actually see any of the plants in them, and that actually does correlate with them not having much output at all in the middle of the day. So if these were to follow the sun throughout the day, we would get much higher output from them. Now in the case of these algae farms, I have so much algae, it's really not needed. Like, so much, I'm just not going through it. But moving things look cool. So make things move. That's kind of where it comes to for me, is yeah, it looks cool. But there are situations where it might be useful, such as you're playing in multiplayer and you want to have enough food to provide for a bunch of people, or you're playing on the moon or on an asteroid. So solar power is your best option for something that's going to give a relatively constant power output, because you can't use wind turbines. If you are on a planet like Earth-like or Alien or Mars, the wind turbines are probably going to be your most reliable power source by a large margin. If we have a look in our control panel over here and I search for wind turbine, you can see it gives 456 kilowatts of power. Our solar panels at their absolute maximum give 160 kilowatts. So they're not very effective compared to these things, but they're fun. What we're going to be building is a few different types of tracking solar arrays using the vanilla systems that are available. And I know that what I'm going to be building is fairly large, and I know that it's going to be moving, and I know that I don't want it to run into other things. Let's build a bit of a platform out here upon which we can place our tracking array. That should be plenty of clearance. Then I'm going to press Control 3, go to my third hotbar, press G, and scroll down until I see this row here. And I want the rotor, so I'm going to right click, and I want the hinge, right click there too. And for our simplest solar array, what I'm going to begin with is a rotor, and then a hinge directly on top. I'm just going to rotate this hinge because it's going to line things up with the sun more quickly. And before I weld these up, I'm going to go back over here to my control panel and find them in my control panel. So I'll search for hinge, and you can see that 2 results have shown up. I'm not going to know which is which, except for the fact that I haven't built this hinge yet, so I know it's the incomplete one. So I can select this, and I can call this solar tracking hinge, and this hinge is going to be controlling the up-down of the solar panels, so I'm going to call this elevation. Then I can search for rotor, and in this case there were no other examples, so rotor it is. So I know exactly which one it is, even if I built it up, but just in case, it's a nice habit to place the blocks, name the blocks, go back to it. A habit that even after 7,000 hours of playing this game, I still haven't developed. But which I'm showing you here because this is one of those things that, yeah, if you can get into this habit, you will save yourself so much pain. So much pain. So for this rotor, I'm going to name it Solar Tracker Rotor Azimuth 1. So your azimuth rotor is the rotor that controls movement in this sort of direction. The left and right, the spinning at the base. Elevation is your up and down. And we need to know those names because we're going to be using them later. So I'm going to get all the parts for this. There are 4 parts here. There's the rotor base, the rotor part, the hinge base, and the hinge part. In this case, because we're building solar panels and we're not building oxygen farms or algae farms, we don't really need to worry about the parts being welded up, but it will be a lot more resilient to damage if we do make sure that it's welded up. So we'll right click on each one, add them to our build planner queue, and then go and grab the parts from our inventory. With those built, we can now start building our solar panels. So let's go to our third hotbar and search for solar. We can grab that here. Let's take a look at the block. The solar panel comes in 2 sizes. We have a small grid version and a large grid version. You can see on the left there are 4 little lights, 4 indicators that will tell you how well this is functioning and how much sunlight it's getting. they work identically to these ones that are on our algae farms. If they're getting full sun, 4 green. If they're getting half sun, 2 green. If they're yellow, that means it's turned on but there's no sunlight, and if it's red, it means the block is off. So we can show that here, like so. So that'll give you an idea of how much sun they're getting on them. Now solar panels, we could, like those algae farms, just place them flat like this, and they will get some power. If you have the decorative 3 DLC, you'll also have 2 other options for solar panels. These 2 colorable ones, which will take on whatever color you choose to paint them. If you have this DLC, these are probably the panels you're going to use because they allow you to have much more control and they do kind of look nicer. But if you don't have it, then you can use these base game ones. Both will work just fine in the design that I'm about to show off, and I think both look okay, but I definitely lean towards the DLC ones when I'm actually building with these. So let's get building. I am not going to build this directly onto this hinge part. And the reason is, it can't. But also, even if it did let me, it would look ugly. So, what we're going to do is we're going to grab a 2x1x1 base block, this slope piece, and make sure the slope aligns with our hinge like so, and place that on there. Then I'm going to use some half blocks, and I'll place 5 of these on. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nope. Of course, I run out of steel plate in the middle of that sentence. Can't even count to 5 because I don't have the inventory. 4, 5. And there we go. I went with 5 because the solar panel is a 2x4 block. So that means I can place these on the side of this block, like so. 1, 2, 3. Quite neatly. And similarly on this side, rotating that around. I like having the thicker base part closer to the center. And that will be our array. So I'm going to get this welded up. And then we're going to do some playing around with the hinge and the rotor. To do that in a way where we can actually see what's happening, let's go to our G menu and we'll search for button. Right click on that. We're going to add this button panel so that we've got a way to access the control panel while we can see those blocks. So I'm going to fly down here. I'm going to pop it down just here. And with the button panel built, we can open up the control panel and you can see that through my control panel, I can actually see a decent amount of the background. If you'd like to see a similar amount, you can press escape, go to options, go to game, go to UI, and change the UI background and HUD background opacity to around 60%. That's where I leave them because I find that's dark enough that I can read the font and read the text over the shadow, but it's transparent enough for me to see stuff that's going on behind my control panel. I have bad habits of opening control panels while driving, so it's really important that I can see through these things. So now let's have a look at our hinge. What we're going to do is we're going to drop this down as low as it can go because that's probably going to be the position in which it's going to hit something. So we'll drop that down. We'll then get our rotor and we'll start this spinning. With the rotor spinning, you can see anything that this might run into. And I can even add an obstacle and see what happens. So if I put this in here, a couple of blocks, you can see that that's run into it. Nothing has gotten damaged though, which is kind of lucky, but part of that is because it's all on the same grid and there's an immunity to damage to things that are on the same grid. So if I say make something that isn't the same grid and then clear that out of the way, yeah, that happens. So let's repair this, and what I'm going to do to make this repairable is right click on my velocity here, which resets it to 0 because that's the default for the rotor. We'll rebuild these solar panels. And then we'll set this up to be a safe way to test whether you've got any collisions. Because if you're unsure and you want to test, you're going to want a safe way to do this. So to begin with, let's put our obstacle in the way. And then we're going to use some safe values. Find our rotor, scroll down here, and for our torque, we're going to control left click on that and type in 250,000. That's going to be 250 kilonewton meters of torque, which combined with a velocity of 5, not 58, 5, will be safe. See? No damage. There may be situations, particularly where you have a very, very heavy array, where even that low amount of torque will be enough to cause damage, because the impact force is related to the mass of the object you're hitting the thing with. so do keep that in mind, but for most situations this should be relatively safe, and if it does cause damage, the damage should be limited. So if not for our horrible obstacle here, this is very clear of any obstacles, so we can be happy with it as it is. So let's stop that rotor again, and I'm going to reset it to default to show you some things with that torque value later on. Now we need 2 more blocks to make this be able to track the sun. First off, it has to be able to see the sun, so we're going to get a camera. We're going to put it on the face aligned with the solar panels. It needs to look the same way as the solar panels want to look. With cameras, if you're ever going to look through this yourself, you want to make sure that it's oriented correctly. With large grid cameras, you can see a little bar on it and a little dot. The dot needs to be on the bottom and the bar needs to be on top. If you're ever having trouble remembering that, look at the icon from the build menu and see the little dot and make sure you put it in the same spot. The bar sits where the camera font is. In small grid, there's actual font. In large grid, there's not. Don't weld this up yet, because what we're going to do is we're going to name it. Camera. It's going to be this incomplete one. This will be solar tracker camera 1. Now we can weld it up. Then we need 1 more block to make this work, and that is a custom turret controller. I'm going to build a little platform over here, so I've got somewhere to put it. So now we can search for custom, and it'll be the only block that shows up, custom turret controller. So I'll place this down and weld it up. This custom turret controller does need to be connected to the rotor and the hinge, but it doesn't need to be on the same grid as them. You can put this on a rotor itself, whatever you like. It just needs to be connected to them. So then we can hop in and have a look at what we need to set this thing up. If I open the control panel, you'll see the usual sort of stuff up the top. And then we come to this bit where we've got assign azimuth rotor, assign elevation rotor, camera. We've got velocities that it can set and angle deviations it's happy to accept. But what we want to do first is set up this azimuth rotor. So we're going to pick our solar tracker rotor azimuth. Then our elevation rotor, where I'm going to realize that I've said solar tracking and solar tracker and mixed the 2 of them. So I'm going to fix that because that's going to bug me. But we'll select that one. And then camera. And then scroll all the way past all these other options until we find always aim at sun. And we'll select on. And you'll see our array just moved all of a sudden to be in a perfect alignment with the sun. If we look at our solar panel now, you can see that it's capable of producing 159.72 kilowatts, which is 0.27 kilowatts less than its theoretical maximum. So that's pretty good alignment. I am very happy with that. If you wanted to make this bigger, you can just simply add more solar panels to this. Or you can make another array with another custom turret controller controlling that array. Each setup like this will need its own custom turret controller. For a lot of bases, 6 solar panels is not going to be enough to power your base. You're probably going to need to make this bigger, and you can keep expanding this to a fairly large size before you're going to run into troubles. Though, given the way the solar panels move and that they're quite close to ground height, you may find that you'll either want to set this rotor up higher and lift it way above your base so that it's got clearance all around it so you can get bigger, or go for a slightly different design, one of which I'll show you later. But what if I wanted to use this for my algae farms, or if you're in space, for your oxygen farms? Well, what we need to do first is start from a conveyor junction, because this needs to be connected to our conveyor system. So we'll start by placing that down, and then for our rotor, we need to choose a different rotor. Over here, we've built the basic rotor. What we need for our conveyoring is an advanced rotor. So we'll place that down. Similarly, place our hinge, and then before we weld it up, we're going to name those blocks. Once they're named, get them welded up. And for this, make sure you get the rotor part fully welded up above that functional line. You can get it to functional with just the steel plate if your iron supplies are a bit tight, but if you want it to have its maximum durability, you need to add those large steel tubes too. Okay, all welded up. So now, unlike before, we can't really use the slope blocks. We're going to need to have conveyors. And just like before with the solar panels, there are some aesthetic choices that can be made a bit nicer if you have access to the DLCs. For a perfectly base game version, you're going to be stuck with using conveyor junctions here because we need to have connections in 4 directions. If you have the heavy industry DLC, you can use these conveyor pipe crosses, which personally I quite like the look of, as a way to connect to our algae farms. And similarly, you can use the Apex DLC if you've got these half farms and you want to make something a bit smaller. But we're going to stick with base game versions, and I'll place down just 3 of those conveyors, and then we'll grab our algae farm and place these on the sides. Now, algae farms and oxygen farms have an orientation that matters, just like solar panels. The side that needs to be facing the sun is the side that has those indicator markers. This side does not produce anything if it's exposed to the sun. This side does, or its exact opposite on the other side. So we need to make sure we get this the correct way around. So that's the control panel, and those indicator lights need to be facing the direction we expect our array to point at the sun. So we can place 6 of them on like so. If you want to, you could always put a 7th up here. I'm not sure I like that as a look, so I'm just going to leave it with just the 6. As before, then we need a camera pointing the direction we want it to face, and a custom turret controller. I'll get all that welded up, and then we'll set it up and make sure it works as well. To make this look a bit more complete, I've added some of these conveyor caps to cover up some of the conveyor junctions. We could move this camera across to here if we want to cover the middle one as well, but I kind of like it with the yellow in the middle. As before with our custom turret controller, scroll down, find azimuth rotor, we'll select Solar Tracker 2 azimuth, Solar Tracker 2 elevation, Solar Tracker 2 camera, and aim at sun. And there we are. It's now aiming at the sun. So there we go. With that hooked up to my base by conveyor, I can now take algae from here and use it to produce, which means I can remove the other ones. And this is going to produce a lot more algae than the 6 farms over there, because this is going to be tracking the sun perfectly throughout the whole day. As long as you've got it conveyed up, you can make it so that this is a combined algae and solar array, because our solar panels can attach to the sides here, like so. So it needn't be a single purpose. It could be you've set it up for the algae farms, you're like, oh, I'd like to make this produce some power too, so let's add some solar panels to it. And that can work quite nicely to give you a bit of extra juice. In this case though, I will mostly just block the array behind it. One of the big downsides of this style of array is when it's built close to the ground, it kind of gets in the way of building stuff anywhere near it. So you could put these up on top of your buildings so that they're well clear of most things surrounding them, even put them on top of a pillar. Or we can build a different style which is built on a pillar and reaches down only as low as we know we've got clearance for. So let's build a really tall tower here. So tall that we can even avoid these wind turbines. Doesn't need to be this tall, I'm just using this as an example. Then, at the top of that, we're going to place a rotor. A block, and then a rotor on each side of this block in the middle. On each of those rotors, we're going to place a 2x1 base slope. And we want to make them sure they're pointing out this way, so that we can place a camera on them in the correct orientation. Doesn't matter which way round you place it like this, as long as that slope is going out away from the tower. So that just like before, we can go to these 2x1 bases. Same on this side. Because this is lined with that tower, we can now see how many solar panels we can fit. For those who have the DLC, I'm going to show off what that looks like. If you don't, you can replace every single full solar panel with one of these regular ones. We'll place them above and below the line. And you can see that's not going to collide with our tower because we're at our lowest point. And then to create an interesting shape, I'm going to use these angled ones. So I'll get this welded up. If you happen to place these rotors and weld them up and forget to name them, there are still ways we can use the incomplete stage to find out what they're called. So if we head back down here to a control panel and search for rotor, Rotor 4 will be the one that's our main pillar's rotor, because it's in white. So we'll first name it, and we'll call it Solar Tracker 3 Rotor, and this is going to be our azimuth. And both of these ones will be our elevation, but we don't know which one is left and which one is right. To find that out, what we can do is fly up here and grind one of them down, just below that functional line. So now that it's non-functional, it'll show up as the incomplete one. We can go control panel, rotor, and it will be this one. So we'll call that Solar Tracker 3 Rotor elevation. I'll call it left. And then I'll call the other one right. And then we need a camera on both sides, so we'll place a camera down. I'll get to why this is jiggling and how we can fix it in just a moment. I'm going to place the first one down and not the second, because I'm going to place one, name it, place the other, name it, so that I know exactly which one's which and I don't have to go back and forth multiple times. You might notice I'm placing my camera one block away from the base block. There's no reason for that. I just like the look of it. You don't need to do that. Now we need 2 custom turret controllers, 1 for each side. So for the first array, the one on the left, I'm going to hop in here and I'm going to select azimuth, rotor 3 azimuth. Elevation rotor is going to be our elevation left. Assigned camera is going to be camera left. And then it can track the sun. We'll just take a look at what that's done. You can see that the left-hand side is now perfectly facing the sun, but the center part has also done some rotation. So this side is kind of like our master side. This is the side that's going to be controlling the central pillar. This side only needs to control this rotor because that's the only remaining rotor that's not doing what it needs to do. So when we go into this second custom turret controller, we can scroll down and just select elevation. Solar tracker 3, rotor elevation right, assigned camera right, and then aim at sun. What this also shows you is not only can we make a complex array that uses multiple rotor setups like this with our custom turret controller, but also if you want to have this only track the sun in one axis, you can. So if you just want some arrays that are pointing perfectly up and just spinning on the spot and just following the sun, say you're on a polar region and the sun is going around you rather than up and over you, you can do that. But let's get to the jiggling elephant in the room and see if we can fix this. And also see if I can get to the ground without dying.
Fuel critical.
Geronimo! Oh yeah. One of the reasons that this array is jiggling when these aren't really is because of one of the things that makes this array actually better. These are all rotating along this line. There is equal mass on either side, which means they're perfectly balanced, meaning that this rotor doesn't have to do much work. Similarly, this one doesn't have to do much work because it's perfectly balanced on either side. If we compare that to this setup, where more torque is being required from both the rotor and the hinge to move this because everything is off axis, nothing is balanced. And that is why this is jiggling, because these rotors, they're too strong. They don't need to be at their default strength. So we can stop that jiggling by reducing their torque. If we go in here and go rotor, we'll find all 3 of these. We're going to reduce this down until it can easily move it, but the jiggling also stops. So around 500 kilonewton meters of torque should be fine. And look at this. Not a jiggle in sight. When I push the torque back up, you can see that the jiggle returns, and it is only present when I get close to this. But if I kept pushing the torque up higher, if I could, which you can through changing some game menu options, you'd see that this jiggle can get a lot worse. Speaking of game options, that's another thing you may come across as a solution to this problem, and that is share inertia tensor. This is a setting you can enable if we go to our menu, go to load game, select our game, edit settings, advanced, scroll all the way to the bottom, and we can enable share inertia tensor. Click OK, OK, and load the game. So now we can select our 3 rotors and select share inertia tensor. As you can see on the tooltip, this says it equalizes the virtual masses of connected grids to achieve more stable behavior. And what that means is that the mass across this rotor has been equalized. So what's on this side is now the same on that side. So the mass of this tiny little grid here, these 2 rotors, this 1 block and this 1 rotor part down the bottom, that now equals a station. And a station is a static grid and has ridiculous mass. So this now has ridiculous mass. What this means is now those rotors have to work much harder, and so they're less likely to overshoot their mark and result in some of that jiggling. At least that's my best theory about why that jiggling happens, because reducing torque fixes it and increasing mass fixes it as well. And in this case, we've increased mass by using the shear inertia tensor setting, shifting that mass from one side of the rotor to the other. One of the other things that's very commonly mentioned around this area of jiggling things is something that's available on rotors, which is called braking torque. Braking torque is applied when the rotor is switched off, never at any other point in time. So if the rotor is on and actively moving towards a target, braking torque applies nothing. Absolutely zero, it doesn't work. Torque is what's applied when the rotor is on. So right now the rotor is on with 33.6 meganewton meters of torque. If I turn this off, this rotor now has no braking torque at all, which means I can do this. I can add some mass by adding some blocks here, and this will start to rotate. Because there is no torque being applied, because there's no braking torque. To demonstrate the braking torque is not applied when this is on, what I will do is we'll go rotor. And it's this one. We're going to turn the torque way down to nothing. We'll turn this back on. And if braking torque were applied when it's on, this should now come to a halt. But as you can see, the rotor is still moving. So, torque for when it's on, braking torque for when it's off, appropriate torque for the appropriate task, and shear inertia tensor when things still don't work. So there you have it, there's a few different ways to set up your solar arrays. Hopefully this will help a few people avoid something that I struggled with for a very, very long time. That being when I built things with a lot of subgrids, they tended to jiggle more than I could ever manage to control. If you've got any of your own tips, questions, anything you want clarified, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And there'll be more tutorials and more Space Engineers content coming soon. And I will see you then.